Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Alexander, Caribbean Regional Coordinator for Free the Slaves and co-chair of the Membership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. It's our pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today. And in observance of World Day Against Child Labor, which is held annually on the 12th of June, Free the Slaves and the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons are collaborating to examine the state of child labor in 4 CARICOM member states and an overview of child labor in the Caribbean as a whole, looking at identifying areas for concern that exacerbate the vulnerability of minors and also exploring solutions to address this scourge. So with us today is Mrs. Diane Gordon Harrison. She is the chair of the Leadership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons, and she will introduce her panel after I just read for you some information about Diane. So Mrs. Gordon Harrison has been children's advocate of Jamaica since January 2012 and has been the country's national rapporteur on trafficking in persons since March of 2015, making her the first to hold such a position in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's an attorney at law by profession with over 20 years experience and has practiced at the public bar since her graduation from the Norman Manley Law School. Prior to her appointment as children's advocate, Mrs. Gordon Harrison served as Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions within the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Since 2025, representing the Office of the National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, she has served as the chair of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. I hand you over now to Mrs. Gordon Harrison.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for the very warm welcome. And I would like to extend my personal welcome to all of you who have taken the time out to join us for what will be a very important discussion today. It promises to be a very rich panel in terms of the expertise that we have gathered and just the various representative voices from different jurisdictions across the Caribbean region. I will, of course, introduce the panelists to you in due course, but I think it would be remiss of me not to share a few of my thoughts on the eve of World Day Against Child Labor and, of course, on the official kickoff to World Cup 2026, which I know will occupy many persons' attention over the next couple of weeks. So a very pleasant good afternoon and warm welcome to all of you. Today we gather for a very important conversation, one that sits at the intersection of human rights, economic development, and the future of our region. This webinar focuses on the issue of child labor in the Caribbean, its causes, its consequences, and critically, what we can do about it. As the title of the webinar says, we're looking at child labor in the Caribbean and really addressing concerns that exacerbate vulnerability. We come together in the spirit of the International Day Against Child Labor, which is observed, as Adrian said, tomorrow, the 12th of June. This year, the theme is Red Card Against Child Labor, no doubt making that link to football, World Cup, soccer, some of you, if you're joining us from outside of the region, and really serving as a very timely reminder about how difficult it can be for vulnerable persons when we have huge sporting events that are taking place either in their communities or their region. So this is really a powerful rallying call. Borrowing from the universal language of soccer and sport and football, it sends an unambiguous message to the would-be child laborer, to the would-be trafficker who is going to be seeking to exploit children. And we're saying to them, a red card is being issued to you with our collective voices to ensure that you do not, in fact, proceed with your malintent. We need our playgrounds to be safe. We need our children to be safe in their homes. We need their communities to be safe so that they can grow, learn, and thrive. In the Caribbean, as we all know, the picture is complex depending on the country in which you live. Child labor intersects with the informal culture that exists in some of our communities, in our labor markets, in the tourism sector, in agricultural sectors, and also in deep-rooted household vulnerabilities. It is not a distant problem, ladies and gentlemen. It exists right within our midst. It really is hidden in plain sight. So let us together hearken all of our curious minds as we listen to the panelists, whom I will introduce. You will note as well as I go through the introductions that our panel is particularly diverse. You will hear speakers from Suriname. You will hear speakers from Trinidad and Tobago. You will hear speakers from, well, you're hearing from me now in Jamaica. And of course, you will hear from Haiti. And so this is going to be a very rich panel. Now I'm just going to bring up the bios so I can do a proper introduction of the panelists. If you'll give me one moment, I had it here and it seems to have disappeared again, but I promise you it will come forward. All right, here we go. All right, so I'm going to introduce the panel in the order in which they will address you. So we're going to start off with Marta, and Dr. Marta Furland works with Free the Slaves as the Senior Program Manager for Research. She's also a research fellow on climate change and conflict, and she's a non-resident research fellow at the Center on Armed Groups. Marta holds her PhD in international relations, and her research interests include the human rights impact of climate change with a special focus on indigenous communities. She's passionate about community-based participatory action research that involves people in the formulation of solutions. Marta has done research in the Caribbean region. For example, she used Antigua and Barbuda as a case study post-Hurricane Irma, looking at the intersection of climate change and human exploitation. She has also completed a research on child labor in the Caribbean and created a child-friendly resource for young readers, making her suitable and very qualified to address us this afternoon. Marta will be followed by our representative from Trinidad and Tobago, none other than the one and only Neil Derrick. He is an independent consultant and a strategic systems thinker with extensive experience in human resource management, industrial relations, organizational transformation, and governance across the public and energy sectors in the Caribbean. Apart from his experience in the human resource field, Neil has done research, and his advocacy interests include labor governance, vulnerable populations, migration, artificial intelligence and systems, approaches to workforce and social protection challenges within developing economies and the Caribbean region. Neil currently serves as Vice Chairman of the Employers Consultative Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and he also has other roles that he fulfills within his island home. Followed by Neil, we will hear the perspective from Haiti. We have Smith, who is with us, and he will be our third speaker. Smith Maxime is currently serving as the co-executive director for Beyond Borders, after spending a decade working for Free the Slaves in different capacities. Early in his career, Smith worked in journalism and communication, but as time moved on, he dedicated his time and organizational capacity to the promotion of the rights of vulnerable groups, gender equality, and project management. During the past decade, Smith has worked alongside Haitian non-governmental and community-based organizations to help strengthen their organizational and institutional systems, conducting organizational assessments, and developing and implementing programs to strengthen institutional capacity. Smith completed his university studies in law and earned a master's degree in project management. Now, after Smith, we will be hearing directly from a person who has lived experience. So we will hear from Emmanuel, who we're very, very pleased to have join us today and consider ourselves extremely honored to be sharing the stage, virtual stage in an event with Emmanuel, who will speak to us about not necessarily his lived experience during the trafficking experience, but how he was extracted from that experience and how he has been coping post his trafficking episode. And very relevant to this discussion, Emmanuel is a survivor of child labor and he is living in Haiti. And so, because Emmanuel speaks Creole, we will be assisted by a Creole interpreter who can go between English, Haitian, and Creole. So, we look forward to hearing and receiving Emmanuel's contributions. The final speaker on the panel is none other than our youth ambassador from CARICOM, and he's Richard Pinas, who will give us the Surinamese experience. Richard is a dynamic leader and the CARICOM youth ambassador representing Suriname. He has emerged as a prominent voice in national governance, having addressed the parliament in Suriname on 2 separate occasions to influence youth-centric policy. Beyond governance, Richard is a dedicated champion of climate action. He's a member of the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy, and he advocates for sustainable development and ensures that the Caribbean's fight for climate justice is heard at every level. Richard is committed to fostering regional cooperation and ensuring that the youth of Suriname are active architects of a resilient and prosperous future for the entire Caribbean. With a solid foundation in international business and management, Richard combines academic rigor with a deep-seated passion for social change, and certainly our window into what the youth are thinking about child labor in their country and, of course, within the Caribbean. And so, without further ado, I will now yield to the panel for them to use the 10 minutes each that they have been allotted to do their presentation in the order of the introduction. So we will start with Marta, followed by Neil, then Smith, then Emmanuel, and then Richard will close us out before we move on to the next section of the webinar. So again, welcome and get ready to be enriched and empowered with the knowledge that we will share today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Gordon Harrison, for this very warm introduction and for setting the tone of today's conversation. It is a pleasure for me to be part of this very important webinar at such a timely moment. I will now share my screen as I prepared a few slides that will accompany me during the presentation. So today I will use the time available to me to introduce a new fact sheet on child labor in the Caribbean developed by Free the Slaves. This resource was created as part of our broader commitment to advancing children's rights and supporting efforts to prevent child labor across the region. The fact sheet that we developed serves several purposes. First, it is intended as a practical resource for everyone working to protect children in the Caribbean, including educators, community leaders, civil society organizations, child protection practitioners, and of course, government officials. It provides an accessible overview of child labor, the form that it takes in the region, the factors that place children at risk, and the consequences on children's well-being. Most importantly, however, the fact sheet was designed for children themselves. Too often, what we observe is that information about child labor is produced for adults, while the children who are the ones directly affected by this human rights violation have only limited access to information presented in an accessible way. So we wanted to change that. The fact sheet explains in a simple and child-friendly language what child labor is, how it differs from, for instance, helping in the house or learning a skill in a safe environment. It helps children understand their rights, recognize situations that may be exploitative or harmful, and learn about the avenues for protection that are available in the Caribbean region in each CARICOM country. So it is very important from this point of view because it includes practical information that children can use directly, such as the minimum legal working age in the country where they live, and emergency contact numbers that children can get in touch with if they or someone whom they knew is in need of support and help. So what you see on the screen right now is the two versions of the child labor fact sheet, the one for the children on the left side and the one for the regular audience on the right side. And I will now guide you through the content of our child labor fact sheet. What we say in our child labor fact sheet is that child labor remains a significant concern throughout the region. Approximately 1 in every 8 children is involved in child labor, and many of those children are very young. We're talking of children between 5 and 11 years old. Boys are more frequently identified as child laborers, but girls are also affected. In many cases, girls perform domestic work, they take care of younger siblings, or they look for elderly members of the family. And because this work takes place inside the homes, it is harder to see, harder to report. When it comes to the most common forms of child labor in the Caribbean, we are talking about domestic work, street vending, farming, construction, manufacturing, and mining. And these activities can expose children to physical danger, to exploitation, to long working hours, and to psychosocial harm. So why do children become involved in child labor? Of course, there isn't a single cause, but rather an intersection of factors, and every child's story is, of course, unique and different. However, one major factor that we have identified is poverty. When families struggle to meet their needs, children may feel pressure to contribute financially, drop school, and engage in work to support their family. Another factor is limited access to education. In some communities, schools may be far away, educational resources may be scarce, or opportunities to continue education beyond a certain grade are limited or not existent. And when children cannot attend school consistently, they become more vulnerable to entering the workforce at a young age. Another issue is family instability that can also increase vulnerability to child labor. So children who live in unsafe homes, who experience neglect, may feel pushed into looking for ways to support themselves independently, which may push them towards finding employment in the informal sectors where exploitation is more likely to take place. Also, migration can create additional challenges, so children whose families have moved from one country to the other, or even from one region to the Caribbean, may find themselves struggling to access social services, education. Their families may be struggling to have stable livelihoods, which makes child labor more likely. This is especially the case if the family has moved through irregular migration pathways, which makes the children not able to access social services. And finally, it is worth remembering that cultural traditions can also play a role. In many Caribbean communities, children help with their family and different family businesses, family income generating activities. And this is not inherently harmful, but problems arise when work becomes excessive, when it is dangerous, or when it prevents children from accessing education or enjoying a healthy development. So what are the consequences of child labor? First, children's health. Dangerous working conditions can cause injuries, illness, and long-term harms. Also, child labor can affect emotional well-being. Children who work in difficult conditions may experience stress, fear, loneliness, anxiety, have low self-esteem. Child labor also undermines education because, of course, children who work often have to miss classes, they struggle to keep up with their studies, with their homework, or they need to leave school. And this is interesting because it emphasizes the fact that lack of access to education and child labor are in a bidirectional relationship, meaning that when you're not able to access education, you're more likely to enter child labor situation, and also being in situations of child labor makes it harder to access school regularly. Also, when children cannot engage in school because of child labor, they may face then fewer opportunities later in life. And I'm going to expand on this a bit more, meaning that child labor can then create a cycle of poverty that continues across generations. When children miss out on education, they miss out on opportunities. They may grow up facing the same economic, social challenges that their parents were facing, which increases the likelihood that their own children will also be forced to work. However, I would like to end on a positive note. It is true that child labor is still an important and pressing issue in the region, but we can do something about it. All of us can, depending on what our role in society is. We have the capacity of act on it. Governments can strengthen laws, improve enforcement, ensure that all children have access to quality education, even those that are located in more rural, remote areas. Schools, school teachers can help identify children who may be at risk, provide support, link children in those vulnerable situations with service providers. Communities can also become more aware of the signs of child labor, implement community-based monitoring strategies, and create safe environments where children are protected beyond their own family unit. Families can learn to seek support when facing hardships such as economic hardship and prioritize children's education whenever possible. And young people themselves should know that they have rights. No child should be forced into work that is unsafe, exploitative, or prevents them from learning and growing. And our hope is that with this child-friendly fact sheet, children will be able to see the avenues that are available in their countries to seek support. So in conclusion, child labor remains a serious challenge, but it is preventable, and by working together, we can ensure that every child throughout the Caribbean has the opportunity to learn, to play, to grow, and to thrive in safety and in dignity. And before concluding, I want to invite you to scan these QR codes to access and download our child labor fact sheet. The one on the top is for the child-friendly version, while the one on the bottom is for the regular audience readership. Thank you so much, and back to you, Mrs. Gordon Harrison.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marta, for the presentation. I'm sure that persons have questions, but we'll save them for the general Q&A session. So thank you for that. We'll move, therefore, now to hear from Mr. Neil Derrick out of Trinidad and Tobago. Neil, are you ready for us?
Thank you, Mrs. Gordon Harrison. And I think it's good coming after Dr. Fulon. I'm really pleased with, I think, what she has covered. I think it gives us a step in from coming with the perspective from the Employers Consultative Association of Trinidad and Tobago. But I think because we are such an integral part of the Caribbean Employers Confederation, I think the perspective is one that more or less covers the Caribbean employers, although I'm not officially speaking on their behalf. So let me start by stating at the outset that the ECA is unequivocally rejects child labor in all its forms. As just articulated, child labor undermines the rights of children, it compromises educational attainment, it weakens future workforce development, and ultimately limits the social and economic progress for societies. We think that when we look at the participation, especially by, let me just name some countries: Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica, Barbados, Belize, Guyana, Suriname, St. Kitts and Nevis, who have been kind of the front runners, and who have embraced the international framework for combating child labor from the ILO itself, into the ILO labor initiatives. We think that that sends the message that there is a lot of support. One thing that we were happy to see is that at least 9 Caribbean member states have ratified ILO Convention number 138, which is the minimum age convention, Convention of 1973, which establishes the minimum age for admission to employment. And that requires countries to progressively abolish child labor. The second is ILO Convention number 182, right, which speaks to the worst forms of child labor convention 1999. And that has been ratified by 12 Caribbean member states. Now, this ratification is really an acceptance, and then these countries restructure it to put it into their own laws. This really identifies a number of frameworks and a number of issues that should drive the laws of these countries into facilitating this whole process of child labor itself. I think that, again, I was saying that part of this whole issue of child labor is really the recognition that people are our most important resource, and making the protection and development of children must become a national strategic imperative. But from an employer perspective, child labor is not simply, and I think it was really established by Dr. Fuller just now, that child labor is not simply a child protection issue. It is also a labor market issue, it is a development issue, and a human capital issue, all the same. Because when children are drawn prematurely into economic activity, and she would have given several examples for that, it interferes with their education, the safety, development, and we're not only harming the individual at that level, we are also weakening the future skills base of the country itself from a point of development, from its productivity, from its competitiveness. So these concerns has to be seen not just from the point of what happens to the child, but we have to also take in the wider sense what happens. And an issue that you raised, which is the issue of the parent, which is a question that we really have to raise. Why do families depend on child labor? Because a lot of this is not being driven just by the child wanting to go and work. It is the fact that many families are depending on child labor. And that really comes from things like insufficient adult employment, low wages, informal employment, weak social protection systems, skill matches, economic instability. We could almost draw a proposition from this whole thing that says where decent work opportunities for adults are limited, the risk of child labor increases. I think it's something that we need to be looking at from a cross-Caribbean discussion. And this is why I would like to suggest that child labor should not be viewed solely as an individual act of exploitation, but again, also as the outcome of broader systemic vulnerabilities. This brings to us what I may describe as the elephant in the room. It is called informality. And I think that informality is the hidden environment, if I can say that, of vulnerability. Because one of the challenges we have is while we spoke about the adoption of the laws and all the conventions, a lot of that in terms of the employer bodies are really, their membership comes from the formal groups and not the informal groups. And we have to look at it at approximately 75% of the workers in the Caribbean, which is 3 in every 4 persons, and some about 585 million workers out of the 7.8 million workers in the Caribbean are actually in informal employment. Not to stress on Haiti, but Haiti, for instance, is about 91% in terms of their own informal employment. In Trinidad, we are a little better, and I think that we could, I mean, this is not a boast, but I think in terms of our social protection systems, a lot of it is developed. But even with that, we are still around 26 to 33%. And that just shows how difficult it is to manage this whole issue of informality. And inside that informal area is where you actually lose the control. Because in the operating places where you could have things like wages, you could follow labor laws, you could maintain records, people make contributions through the social systems like our national insurance schemes. That does not happen the way it's expected to happen inside of this informality thing. So our thing is not just, I think, to identify the response to child labor, which I think is, and I think we have to look at all sides, but on one side. But I think the other side is really looking at those other issues in terms of the labor market and stuff. That because with this large group outside of the formal labor market, we think that is really where a lot of our vulnerabilities are, right? And a lot of work has to be done to how we manage that. Then we're seeing this issue of migration. And I think that it becomes even a little more challenging when you have migration and informality. Because what you have is an intersection where you have persons who might be migrants and without proper systems like that provides for registering, reporting, that provides that, what you have is even more the environment itself of that informality with the migrant population overlapping becomes even more difficult to control. And it's something that we have to look at as we look at our system. Surely another aspect from Convention 138 is the fact that it didn't just establish the minimum age. It also spoke to one thing it did is it put that lower age, it coordinated that with the completion of compulsory schooling. So it is really supposed to be stopping from entering labor, but also part of that convention is the issue of compulsory schooling. And I think when we overlap that with some things like the United Nations Convention on the Rights for Child, the rights of a child, which recognize education, both as a right and protective mechanism, and some of the SDG goals, 4, 8.7, that again recognizes quality education. And I think that overlaps with a lot of the details that would have been raised earlier by Dr. Fulan, which I think we could piggyback on. But I think it comes back to show how important it is for children, for how essential schooling is in this whole process that we're trying to manage. So the obligation of keeping children in school is fundamentally an obligation to protect their future, right, for employees. And I think a lot of details was provided earlier, not to repeat. It is also an investment in human capital, productivity, and competitiveness for the next generation, which I think I would have mentioned before. But we know too that force alone is not enough. We have to also create systems that motivate persons to stay into that system. And we think that not just as we deal even with the formal pieces, in terms of people in the formal system, formal education, that the issue of pathways, clear pathways, that whole issue of school to work transition has to become clearer. Because we still think that in some cases, the education systems are fragmented. When we see what children are graduating with, what happens when they come to employment, there are many mismatches. And I think that a lot of work has to be done. I mean, we are coming from an environment, like in case of Trinidad, maybe because we had oil and we had a lot of expatriates, we had very developed apprenticeship systems, which I think spread over the Caribbean. But we're seeing some of that, we're losing some of that, right? We've seen issues like on-the-job trainings. Only recently, the ILO in 2023 would have gone back to look again at the whole issue of apprenticeships. And would have had a recommendation on apprenticeships. And I think when we look at those things, we have to see how that motivates, because it creates a view between school and work. It really also creates a system of motivation. So I know I've kind of said about a mouthful, so I would like to summarize.
Yes, we're at time.
Yes, from an employer perspective, one of the most effective long-term strategies for reducing child labor is expanding decent work and reducing informality. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Neil, for that whistle-stop tour. We'll certainly get more into it with the Q&A session. But as we depart the Eastern Caribbean, we now make it to the Greater Antilles, and we'll hear from Smith, who is going to give us the perspective as things are on the ground in Haiti. So Smith, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diane. Good afternoon, everyone. It was good to hear from Neil. I think the experience of hearing for employers is so important. If we can expand this experience, to other countries in the Caribbean, that will be very important. Now, talking about child labor in Haiti, let me remind for the audience, when we talk about child labor, we say that according to the ILO Convention, child labor is any work children engage in that interferes with their ability to attend regular schools or is mentally, physically, socially, or morally harmful. That's important to know. Now, for Haiti specifically, talking about child labor, we are facing a challenge. The comprehensive scope of child labor in Haiti is not well documented. There is no data collection system. There is no research or report covering all forms of child labor. But saying that, my conversation would be limited by this fact. But what we can observe, if you are in street cities, you will see children walking dangerously in the public transportation. You will see children walking in informal restaurant. You will see children in sand mining for construction. They work in construction and also they work in agriculture. So you may see also children in prostitution sites. But over the past 5 years, there is a new situation in Haiti. There are children forcibly enrolled in gangs and armed groups. Give it a different name, but it is a situation, whether I call it is a criminal situation, but those children, they are victims and forcibly enrolled in armed groups. Of one form of child labor that attracts attention mostly in Haiti is child domestic servitude. The fact maybe it is because we have more research about it, and also the number is very high. Over 400,000 children, according to the last research published in 2015, more than 400,000 children are considered child domestic workers in Haiti. Now, what are the root causes of this situation in Haiti? For me personally, I would say the first one is the absence or lack of a community of care for children. And as Neil said, it is the case also for Haiti. The burden to take care of a child is rely almost exclusively on the parents. It is the case of Haiti, as there is limited access to public education. 85% of the schools in Haiti, they are private. This means that the government is running only 15% of schools in Haiti. This means parents need money to pay for children education. Also, limited access to public health care. You need money to get access to health care. Going deeper, it is an issue of wealth creation and public investment. If we take a look at the national budget for the fiscal year 2025 to 2026, the budget was 2.7 billion US dollars. But in this, we had only 623 million for public investment. And if we go beyond the last year, over the past 25 years, public investment has never reached 28% of the revenue collected by the government. In 2022, it was 2.17% of the revenue collected. 2023, it was 3.43%. 2024, it was 1.53%. In 2025, it was 4.71% of public investment. This means that the money collected is not invested for the well-being of the society. There is another issue of wealth distribution and subsequently the extreme inequality we have in Haiti. And Neil mentioned that the poverty and the matters research mentioned about poverty. We have 23.8% of the population living in extreme poverty. This means 2.5 million people in Haiti are living with less than 1.23 US dollars per day. But talking about poverty, we have more than 58% of the population, 6 million people, are living with less than 2.41 US dollars per day. And the last is hunger. People are living in food insecurity. We have nearly 5.7 million people are suffering from acute hunger in Haiti currently. So it's not about inequality, it is also labor exploitation and marginalization. The minimum wage, the range from $2.65 to $7.65 per day, depending the economic sector you are in. This means you have a really low minimum wage in Haiti. The factor, contributing to child labor in Haiti is about labor inspection. The labor inspection system is for the formal sector. And most of the child labor cases, they are in the informal sector. This means that there is no inspector to formally, making a case to say that it is a case of child labor. It is something to think about. That is the problem. But what has been done? And most of the government are doing very well in ratifying, ILO or UN convention. Like the Haitian government in Haiti has ratified the ILO convention on the minimum age, the convention number 138, and also the convention on the worst form of child labor, the convention number 182. We are part of this convention. Also, we are part of the convention on the UN convention on child rights, and it's Article 32, addressing the child labor situation. We are part of those conventions. There is a situation specifically with the convention on the worst form of child labor, Haiti still doesn't have the list of types of work considered the worst form of child labor. There is no specific law implementing this specific convention. I think 10 years ago, there was an initiative by the ILO to have the Haitian government, making the specific list, but we never heard about this after. As I said, the child domestic servitude is the dominant type of a child labor, and government NGOs are working to address it. And it is a priority for NGOs like us at Beyond Borders. But what we are doing specifically at Beyond Borders to address this situation. But not into the detail, I have limited time. We are implementing the family graduation program, and it's to help families getting out of extreme poverty. This is specifically on the Laguna Island. It is a model we get from BRAC in Bangladesh. It is really powerful of getting families out of poverty. We are supporting creation of village saving and loan association, and we are piloting a specific version of this. It is adding to the capital specifically for the survivors of child labor, survivors of trafficking in Haiti, helping them getting access to more loan in this Civilian Loan Association. We are supporting as well collective action to ensure all school children have access to quality education. The way we are doing it in the district in the municipality, it is putting school principals, school inspectors, local elected officials, parents, and to think collectively about the situation of all children in the situation. And they have a outlet system if there is a child who is not at school, who is not going to school, and then they can take action to make sure this child is going to school. Also, in communities, we raise awareness, train community members to take action. And we facilitate the articulation of a community system for liberation, care, and reintegration of children. And you will hear from Emmanuel how this system helped him out of child labor situation. We are facilitating the creation of survivor networks and building their leadership. The adult, getting out, who experience child labor, but now they become leader to speak out and then to educate people about the situation. We work with survivors to facilitate their socio-economic reintegration, multiple race, literacy, loans, as mentioned for the Civilian Loan Association. Also, for the survivors, we work with them to heal their trauma. Specific methodology, having psychologists, and there is a dynamic we call well-being groups. They are meeting together to engage in the process to heal the trauma from the experience. Sure, when there is this problem in a society, NGO cannot solve this problem. We need government to formulate public policy, and also not only formulate but also implement public policy to protect children globally in the society that we are advocating with other NGOs to work together to push the government to put more resources toward protecting children. I think we'll hear more when the Q&A. Ms. Diane, I leave back the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Smith. Very interesting indeed, and lots to unpack in the Q&A session. But I think, Smith, you have created quite a very nice foundation for us to now hear from Emmanuel, who will share with us.
Emmanuel, qui pourra partager avec nous.
Ok, bonsoir tout le monde. C'est un réel plaisir pour moi ensemble avec nous après-midi.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Donc, Non, pas moi, c'est Fortune Emmanuel.
My name is Emmanuel Fortinet.
Ok. Même j'aime dire l'italien. Moi, bien content avec nous. Donc,
Like I said, it's very nice to be with you.
moi, c'est un monde qui subit, pratique et reste avec là.
And I was someone who suffered the practice of restavek or to child labor, domestic child labor.
Et puis, je toujours dit, et système, ça relève exploitation. Tout.
And that system is called exploitation.
Ok. Donc, et, moi, j'ai 21 ans.
I'm 21 years old.
Ok. Et, moi, t'ai vivre ensemble avec un pasteur.
I was living with a pastor.
Et côté que l'homme t'ai fait commencer à vivre ensemble avec lui.
When I just started living with him,
Bon, toute bagaille était commencé à aller mieux.
and things were going well.
Toute bagaille était aller très, très bien.
And things were going very well beginning.
Et puis, c'est de jour en jour, et puis, il commençait, toute bagaille commençait à changer.
But day after day, things started to change.
Et puis, il y a des travail que on commence à entreprendre, on commence à forcer faire.
There were things that I was being forced to do.
Donc, c'est aussi pour moi-même, c'est un travail volontaire. Donc, il n'y a pas de problème, les gars toujours fait. Mais c'est un travail, mais disons, sorte de travail forcé.
But it was something I would been done willingly, that would have been fine, but I was forced to do it.
Donc, il était exploité en pile.
He exploited me a lot.
Côté que il était arrivé dans un moment, il était même torturé dans un niveau qui est grave en pile.
And it got to a point where he tortured me a lot.
Côté que, après torture ça,
And after that torture,
et puis, ça te vient frapper communauté à un niveau. Ça te vient frapper communauté, hein.
so that really hit the community, was affected by that.
Et puis tout qui était, ça te même arrivé, causer et torture, là, te même arrivé la justice.
And that torture situation was heard by the justice. It got to the justice, to the trial, to the judge. They heard about it.
Ok, et côté Beyond Borders de même, c'est après ça finit avec la justice et puis m'te fin fait deux par moins et Kai Pasteur.
And so when it got to the trial, to the judge, and then I was able to leave the pastor's house.
Côté m'te arrivé dans orphelinat, m'te passe un petit temps.
And so I got to an orphanage and I spent some time there.
Et côté que Beyond Borders de même l'état fait des marches par bon côté parler
And Beyond Borders is doing their own follow-up to find something for me.
pour te rendre moins respirer en l'autre l'air.
So that I could breathe another air.
Et côté que après et torture ça et puis moi t'es venu joindre avec organisation ça qui c'est Beyond Borders hein.
And after that torture, and I found Beyond Borders.
Et puis l'été permettre moi que moi t'es sorti de capacité avec Ophelina et qu'on y a le placé dans famille d'accueil.
And so that allowed me to leave the pastor's house, to go to the orphanage, and then find another host family that received me.
Et puis à l'aide de famille d'accueil ça gain pile bagaille que me commencer à entreprendre au niveau éducation moi.
And so because in that host family now I'm able to start some more education.
Donc gain bagaille que moi même m'a pas prendre pour avenir moi demain.
So there are things that I'm now learning for my future.
Et puis famille d'accueil ça permet que gain pile bagaille que m'a rivé découvrir.
And that host family is allowing me to discover many new things.
Ça permet que actuellement m'a fait NS4.
Kisasaye and Scott.
m'a fait philo.
Okay, so that's right, that's the school system. He's in the last year of his high school.
OK.
Mhm.
Très bientôt, on va l'examen.
And I'm going to have my last exams very soon.
OK. Et côté que, à l'aide des familles d'accueil, ça, moi, apprendre un pile métier professionnel.
And I've learned a lot of professional training from this host family.
Côté que moi, apprendre carrelage,
Carrelage is what carrelage
et
is,
informatique, et puis
and computers,
sérigraphie, et puis
sonography,
sérigraphie.
calligraphy, c'est qui ça?
Sérigraphie.
Maxime, on pas connaît ça?
On va connaître qui sont fait avec l'Emmanuel.
C'est fait design sur maillot.
Oui, designer.
Oh, okay. So he
Printing.
puts designs printing
Yeah.
on t-shirts. Okay,
Yeah.
printing. T-shirt
Okay.
printing. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
OK.
Mhm.
À l'aide de Beyond Borders, ça permet que me rejoindre avec famille d'accueil ça qui fait un travail extraordinaire.
And because of Beyond Borders helping me find this host family, it's been an extraordinary experience.
OK. Pour me bien dire, l'aime d'arriver avec pasteur
When I got to the pastor's house
en 2013,
in 2013,
et toutes les que l'État exploité maintenant,
all the time he was exploiting me,
j'ai gagné 8 ans.
I was 8 years old.
C'est après que moi vin déplacer
But when I left
et puis il y a des expériences qu'a faites
and I had other experiences,
et puis vous connaissez année a changé plutôt qu'on a
and,
21 ans.
and now years have passed and I'm now 21 years old.
Yeah. Donc c'est pas un bagage qui était facile
It wasn't very easy.
parce que dans moment que m'ta vivre ensemble avec pasteur hein,
It was the time I lived with a pastor.
et c'est parce que m'pas dans moment m'pas de monde m'pas de
Because I didn't have anyone.
c'est celle qui me connaît.
That's the only person I knew
Oui, dans le milieu côté ma vivre là, c'est celle même que me connaît.
in the area I was living in. Who was the only one I knew.
Ça vient permettre que gain des travaux ou entreprendre ou faire. Donc même si vous pas t'avler, faut qu'on fait.
Yeah, there was work that you would do that even though you didn't want to, you had to do it.
Qu'on a là à cause de Beyond Borders qui vient placer dans famille d'accueil.
And because Beyond Borders was able to put me in a host family,
Donc moi a fait des exploits au niveau éducation.
and now I'm being able to experience education, go to school.
Je suis capable de dire un pile changement qui fait au niveau de moi-même
There's been a lot of change for me personally,
qui fait et mentalement, physiquement.
mentally, physically.
Donc, un pile changement qui fait.
A lot of changes happened.
Donc, bon, c'est bon, bah connaît et organisation ça pour moi dans
This organization for me,
l'occasion ça c'est un poteau mi-temps pour moi.
for this experience was like a middle post for me. That's a very cultural thing. A middle post is everything. It's what everything supports.
OK. Donc et qui permet que il y a un pile bagage m'a entreprendre
That's why I'm learning a lot of things
qui fait que m'a préparé avenir moi
and I'm preparing my future.
qui fait bon
I
pas moi qui ça me dégage
don't know what else I can say. A lot of things have changed.
OK, c'est un réel plaisir. Merci un pile. C'est
It
tout.
was a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you. Please express our immense thanks to Emmanuel.
Un pile remerciement. Eu voulais dire Emmanuel. Merci un pile.
And for enriching the contributions from the panel.
Ça
Thank
veut
you.
dire ou vraiment élargir tout ça moun yo ka comprendre des situations.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you. All right. And we move from one young man to another, Richard. our youth ambassador from CARICOM. He will close us out with the final 10 minutes for this portion of the webinar. Richard, are you on?
Yes, thank you, moderator, for your introduction. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in from all across the region and the world, especially Free the Slave for giving us this platform to make our voice being heard.
Sorry, before you
In my
go on,
home country,
Richard, you're sounding
yes,
a little muffled. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who hears it, but if you could perhaps come a little bit closer to your microphone.
yes. Are you
We're
hearing me
hearing
better now?
a little, but we're still hearing an echo.
Uh,
It seems he has an headset that can.
Maybe let me bring this closer, maybe it will work better. Do you hear me better now?
Yes, we'll try with this. Not the best, but we will make a go for it.
Maybe let me then remove the earpiece. Maybe it will sound more better then.
Okay, let's try that.
We try?
Yes, please.
Let me disconnect.
We're not hearing you at all now. Yes, can we try again? Yes, that's better. Much better.
Okay, if I talk into this microphone, you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, a lot better.
Oh my God.
Thank
Okay.
you.
In my home country, Suriname, when we speak of freedom, we use the phrase keti koti, the cutting of change. We look back with immense pride at our Maroon and Creole ancestors who fought brutal colonial plantation systems to claim their basic human dignity. But as the CARICOM Youth Ambassador for Suriname, I'm standing today before your screens to declare that true emancipation cannot remain a historic relic. We cannot truly celebrate past freedom while modern economic change still binds thousands of our children. Child labor is quietly stealing the future of the Caribbean right before our eyes. Today, we look through a Surinamese lens to see how we can move past symbolic celebrations and demand strict and unyielding policy enforcement. Let us first look at ground zero in my home country, Suriname. To truly understand the child labor crisis in Suriname, we must look beyond Paramaribo, which is the capital of Suriname, and turn our eyes to our remote interior districts like Sipalivini and Brokopondo. Here we have unregulated, informal gold mining operations that act as an economic trap. Young boys are being pulled out of school and they go into what we call the go-to boy camps, gold camps, where they go and dig out the gold. They perform grueling physical labor and are diving into deep mud pits and handling toxic mercury with their bare hands. This is compounded by a severe structural gap. Once a child finishes primary school in the interior, there are rarely any secondary schools nearby. Without accessible classrooms, the gold mine or the logging camp becomes their default future. We are trading our children's long-term potential for immediate short-term survival. We must look closer at the most invisible victims in our country. Suriname's heavily forested terrain and highly porous borders made it an active transit and a destination point for human trafficking. Transnational criminal networks actively target the increasing flux of irregulated migrants, especially vulnerable youth, arriving from Venezuela, Haiti, and Brazil, also Cuba. Traffickers exploit their lack of legal status, language barriers, and their deep poverty. These young immigrants are forced into grueling labor trafficking in hidden interior gold mines, construction, and retail. Even worse, young migrant girls are subjected to commercial sexual exploitation inside unregulated clubs and brothels surrounding the mining camps. Yes, it's a reality in the interior of our country. One of the reasons why it's very challenging for the government is because our country is very fast and we have a manpower. We don't have the manpower capacity to be able to monitor all the regions in our country. And those that are in the business of exploiting young children use these loopholes to exploit them further. And these children are not only isolated in the deep forest, but they are cut off from help and escape. This is a regional humanitarian crisis playing out within our national borders. Suriname has not been silent. Nationally, we have built strong legal foundations. Under Article 334 of our Criminal Code, labor and sex trafficking of children under 16 carries strict penalties up to 12 years in prison. In 2018, we passed the Law, Workers and Children Youth Act to modernize our labor laws. We are also executing our Decent Work Country program to strengthen our labor inspection machinery. Furthermore, our specialized trafficking in persons unit under the Suriname Police Force works tirelessly to screen at-risk populations and investigate rings. But as an ambassador, I must be direct. The TIP unit and labor inspectors face a severe lack of staff and resources to cover our massive interior, as I already stated. These laws are strong. Our Tier 1 diplomatic ranking reflects our government commitment, but our field enforcement is starving for logistical support. This is not just a Surinamese fight. It is a collective CARICOM mandate. Regionally, our member states have committed to the regional initiative free of child labor to achieve a generation entirely free of exploitation. Under the Council of Human and Social Development, CARICOM demands the absolute enforcement of the ILO Convention 135 and 182. We can look to our neighbors for successful models. Guyana established a dedicated child labor unit within their Department of Labor and created a legally binding registry of prohibited hazardous work for minors. Jamaica utilized localized youth activity surveys to deploy field labor officers directly to high-risk communities. The regional framework exists and successfully blueprints are right next door. Our failure is not a lack of ideas, it is a lack of regional political will to fully fund and execute them. And I also want to express that in Suriname right now we have an economic and financial situation in our country in which many young people get trapped into going and working in those industries where they get exploited because many parents don't have the necessary resources to cover their education. So some young people want to help their parents. So what do? They go look for where somewhere go and look somewhere where they can find a fast job in where they can earn some money. And that's how they get exploited. And I want to express, therefore, in my capacity as CARICOM Youth Ambassador, to put forward three policy unyielding to demand to our governments and regional bodies. First, we must immediately decentralize and resource labor enforcement. It is useless to have labor inspectors in Paramaribo or Jokkang if they cannot reach the mines or fields. They must be permanently stationed in high-risk districts with full logistical support. Second, we demand strict corporate supply chain legislation. Any company buying Caribbean gold, timber, or agricultural produce must legally prove that their goods are 100% child labor free or face crushing criminal and financial penalties. Third, we must demand an educational infrastructure guarantee. No child in the Caribbean should be forced to choose a mining pit over a classroom simply because their village lacks a high school. We must bridge the geographic gap or divide. To conclude, our children are the ultimate wealth of Suriname and the wider CARICOM region. Natural resources will eventually run dry, but an educated, protected, and empowered generation of youth is an infinite resource. Let us take the fierce spirit of resilience handed down by our ancestors and turn it into a protective shield for our youth. A child's hands were made to hold books, pens, and laptops, not shovels, mercury, or machetes. Let us enforce the laws we have written, honor the treaties we have signed, and ensure that the chains are truly, completely cut for every child in our region. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions in the chat or from those that will express them openly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was very nicely done, of course, not that we expected anything less, and an excellent way to bring a pause to this portion of the webinar. Now, of course, it has been a very rich discussion. All our panelists have done exceptionally well in terms of recapping for you and just highlighting some of the thoughts that I think could pave the way to some of the questions that you have. Marta, of course, you started out with referencing a very practical fact sheet, which is in fact a resource that can guide both the adults in the space and one that's very child friendly. And so it's very usable. I know that the QR code was presented, and perhaps closer to the end of the webinar, I'm going to invite Brian, our tech support, to perhaps re-share the QR codes. And perhaps, Marta, you can think about if there are other ways, if persons are not on this webinar and they wish to access the resource, how they may do so. Of course, we're anchored by the very sobering statistic that 1 in 8 children in the Caribbean are involved in child labor. Then, of course, we heard from Neil with not only the Trinidadian perspective, but also the perspective that spoke to the responsibilities that business leaders and employers have to ensure that we have decent work environments that will ultimately help to reduce child labor. We were reminded by Neil that we do have legal frameworks in a number of the jurisdictions across the Caribbean, and they should serve as a very strong foundation upon which to have efforts now really catalyzed in the various countries. Always thinking of the root, though, as Neil identified that, as to why do families always, in these circumstances, have to depend on child labor, while, of course, contextualizing that and focusing on the danger of informality. Maxime, Haiti has a lot that's going on. We heard about children working in the transportation sector, informal restaurants, prostitution, agricultural industry, and construction, and a very big existence now based on your presentation about being forced into gangs. A question that I will ask you to think about but not answer is whether in the domestic legislation in Haiti, if there is anything in terms of a category of human trafficking known as forced criminality. And of course, we heard about the problems of domestic servitude. and a number of the root causes that you so eloquently went through for us. But very importantly, we ended on what is being done. We heard about the work of NGOs in terms of prodding the government to do more. We heard about the facilitating of survivor empowerment groups and leadership communities, and of course, the collective action, which, as I said while doing the introduction by Emmanuel, really created a very strong base, because what Emmanuel really spoke about was just how much Beyond Borders has done to assist him and to regain certainly that kind of forward thinking process that all young people and children are in fact entitled to. I'm very happy to hear of the work that Beyond Borders has done. Emmanuel is a living example of what intervention that is critical and comprehensive can actually do, because what we're seeing is not just an extraction from a very terrible child labor situation, but certainly the importance of accessing education and looking forward to achieving various ambitions. And then, of course, we heard from Richard, who closed us out, looking at the Surinamese example, and really bringing to our mind the vast geographical differences that exist among Caribbean territories. There are some aspects of Suriname, according to Richard's presentation, that are so remote that active inspection is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And even access to education is severely limited beyond the primary level. And then, of course, as Neil said, if there is no access to education that is of a particular quality, it begs the question, what happens to the children who are so displaced? So indeed, a very rich presentation from each and every panelist. And I think it sets a very good basis for us to open the floor now to any questions that persons may have. We are also monitoring the chat. I've picked up at least one question from the chat already by Dr. Giop, who works in Africa, and we'll get to that. But if there are any questions that persons have, you could indicate by raising your hand at this time using the raised hand feature. We will acknowledge you, and you can unmute your microphones and direct your question, whether to a specific member of the panel or to the panel as a whole, so you don't have a particular point person. Now is your time to engage and to ask those questions that you may have. All right, while you gather your thoughts, we'll go to Dr. Job's question, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing the name too terribly. But Dr. Diop works in Senegal and Central Africa, and her question is for Marta. And the question, Marta, is that there are so many similarities between the Caribbean and countries within the African continent. And Dr. Diop cited, for example, there is the informal economy, socioeconomic vulnerability of families, domestic work, the impact of crises, etc. And her question, therefore, is, what are any best practices or lessons that could be transferred or adopted to West Africa and Central Africa from the Caribbean reality? And in that adaptation, are there any changes that could be made to make the systems and the lessons, more practical for the African culture and society? Over to you, Marta.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this great question. And I will share my thoughts on this, and then I will leave it to the other panelists who are certainly better placed to answer from a Caribbean perspective. But I would say that one important lesson from the Caribbean is the value of combining legal and policy frameworks with awareness raising and community engagement. This because experience shows that legislation alone is rarely enough. and efforts to change social norms, strengthen public understanding of children's rights, of child labor, engaging families, schools, and communities at large are just as important as those pieces of law and policy. And I believe that this lesson is highly relevant to a context such as that of Western Central Africa, where child labor is often deeply embedded in cultural norms and social expectations. I think this is quite clear if we think of an example such as the case of the Taliban in Senegal and in other West African countries, where there is a form of forced child begging that is sustained by certain cultural norms. And I think if we think in terms of adaptation in the Senegalese or Western African setting, then we have to think of the important role that religious leaders in West Africa, in a context such as that of Senegal, would have to play, the importance of engaging with religious leaders to counter some of those embedded cultural, social practices and norms that have been sustaining over several decades forms of child labor, such as that of forced begging in the context of Talibans and Quranic schools. And I think I will stop here to leave the other panelists also an opportunity to react.
Thank you, Marta. Does anyone else want to come in? Any other contributions?
And Diane, to say that for me, it is important to have the law, important to have public policy, but what I would call the community of care for children, it's not only for the parents, it's for the communities. I think it is the best way to protect children.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that, Smith.
If I could add, I think we have to look at it from three levels. One, the first thing, we see it as the law. So yes, we have the laws, but the laws are intended for a certain purpose. And I think more than ever is really defining that purpose and then looking at the systems, because defining that purpose only will not achieve what we want. A good case is the one, and that's not Suriname alone, it's all over. So because it's recursive, if you do not have that continuous monitoring and making the adjustments to achieve the change, then nothing happens. So if you have the law up here, but you do not have inspectors who are inspecting, then nothing happens. You need those three pieces together. One, that clear purpose. Two, you're organized in such a way that you could deliver it. And three, a system of continuous monitoring. Because it's like the real issue is that we have to create like a platform, right? The framework itself to make it happen. And regardless of where it is, there are some good examples, but we have to measure ourselves against that framework and decide what we need to change in terms of our policies, our systems that could make that change.
Thank you. Thank you so much, panelists. There are two more questions in the chat at this time. But before I go to them, are there any participants who are live who would like to open their microphone to ask any question? All right. The second question in the chat is for Richard, and perhaps if there's any other panelist who wants to contribute. What could be done in the case of Suriname in order to reduce child labor or minimize child labor?
Yes. Can you people hear me?
Loud and clear, Richard.
Okay. I think what the government should do is to have what we call a social fang net to support strong families, to make families strong within Suriname, to ensure that people have get the basic needs, things that they need to get to school, that they don't have to go and work, do some job that does not really benefit them. I think the government should do more by giving young people that go to school the benefits that they need. And um, another thing that I would also want to say is that because it's been allowed to foster for so many years, it has become, you could say, a normal thing. So people don't look at it and say, oh, why is that child over there? Especially in the interior. And many people don't even know that it's happening in our interior. So I think we should raise more awareness to this issue. And I also want to thank Free the Slaves Caribbean for raising this issue continuously in our region. Right now in Suriname, I believe that there must be some young people in Suriname that is also locked in, and they are hearing right now, and awareness is being raised. So the more people are being aware of what is really happening around them, I believe that people will, how do I say this, do their utmost to combat child labor. Yes.
Thank you so much, Richard. Smith or interpreters who are online, I think I may need your assistance with the other question that's there, because it's written in what looks like it may be French Creole. And while I have an avid interest, I'm not able to translate it. So I would need some assistance with that, please.
You want to go? It is a commentary, not a question. But Kala, you can translate it.
Smith, I think you should go ahead. I'm not sure if she's able to see it.
Yeah, okay. It is Stefania Sudni. She's the coordinator of the Survivor Network in Port-au-Prince, and she said that it's a pleasure for her to be part of this conversation. She has difficulty to speak, and she said that with Beyond Borders, they are working to organize survivors and to end the civic practice, which is a child domestic servitude.
Great. It's nice to hear from Stefania. I know she was part of the Caribbean Anti-Trafficking Conference that we had last year. Yeah, so it's good to know that she's on board, she's participating in this webinar. Nice to have you, Stefania.
Yes.
Diane?
Yes, and also to demonstrate the importance of partnership, effective partnerships. Yes, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, and it seems as if persons may be a little shy to raise their hands. So I am going to go back with one of my questions that I had, and that question would be to Maxime. In terms of the forced criminality question, does Haiti have as a category of human trafficking in its legislation forced criminality?
Unfortunately not. And what is happening now, the police are killing the children now, undistinctively. And when there is a raid in some area, they are killing those children. And this situation of having an investigation and to determine how they get involved in these armed groups, we don't have this now. I think we need to advocate for put the system in place for protection of children. But unfortunately, in the anti-trafficking law, which is the lens, we can see that we don't have this category. We have domestic servitude, sexual exploitation, any kind of other. But it is a new reality. We had this law in 2014, and then this law didn't take into account this specific aspect of, forcibly enrolled children in armed group.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just raise it because I reflect on the Jamaican situation, and certainly one of my recommendations to our parliament here that we don't necessarily have, wide scale in terms of, just national gangs, but we do have pocketed gangs within certain communities in Jamaica. And we have had for a very long time, I would say, children who are being forced to participate in criminal activity, whether transporting firearms from one end of the community to another because, the police will least expect them, or whether it is they are required to be the lookout while there is a very serious robbery that's taking place. And so we do see very great benefit in having forced criminality as a recognized form of human trafficking, because as you say, rightly put, if that child who is transporting a firearm without really wanting to do so, but doing so out of fear as to the harm that could come to him or her or their families, then should that child be prosecuted as an offender or properly be seen as a victim of trafficking? So that one struck a very familiar chord with me because I'm very mindful of those situations. All right, are there any other questions from the floor or in the chat, or do we now move to the final part of the webinar, which is merely for me to do some closing remarks, which would include not only thanking you for coming, but moving into the International Day Against Child Labor, being very focused on the fact that child labor remains a clear and present danger within the Caribbean. We have heard from different jurisdictions that represent different perspectives on the same problem. So it is one problem with different faces. And I think we really need to be very alert to solutions that exist, catalysts that we can employ to ensure that we're moving towards really addressing the concerns that exacerbate vulnerability, as our theme reminds us that we really should be doing, and ensuring that we never become complacent, because complacency, like informality, is where exploitation lies and thrives. And so I urge us all in our respective countries and disciplines to continue to be a part of the solution, continue to be a part of the dialogue, and ensure that the nuggets that are shared in this conversation do not merely remain towards the end of the webinar, perhaps the end of the day, but that we continue to think about how change can come through our collective actions and our deliberations as we are determined to press on in this particular fight. So on behalf of myself as chair of the panel, and perhaps more broadly, the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons, which is very much supportive of integrated work across the region, and hence such a good fit, I dare say, in terms of our contribution in this particular webinar, because it really represents the ethos of the Caribbean Coalition. It's about partnership, it's about deepening synergies across the region, and really collectively looking at the challenges that we face, not just to identify them, but to plot towards solutions and increasing the responses and the environment that is suitable to have a modern day slavery-free Caribbean. So I want to thank you. And before we close, I'm going to invite Adrian, who so nicely opened for us, to say any particular last words that he may have. And Adrian, not to steal your thunder, I'm going to ask each panelist just to think of one nugget that you would like the audience to take away from your presentation in today's webinar. So Adrian will go first, which will give our panelists an opportunity to think of that one thing that they will say in 1 minute for their takeaway for today. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diane. I've had a fantastic time listening to everyone share. I think for me, it was a confirmation, even as Diane mentioned, that there's tremendous value in the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. There's wonderful contributions from people across the region. It was great to have Suriname represented in our webinar today, and we definitely have been doing some interesting work with Richard and want to continue doing that. It was wonderful to have the business perspective shared that really gave us that kind of clarity as to what's happening across the region. It was a treasure and a pleasure to hear Emmanuel share about his experience and how he has grown beyond what had happened to him. And I think it's a testimony of really what is possible when people come alongside someone and are willing to walk with them, not see them in the light of what happened to them, but see their potential and walk with them into a better and more promising tomorrow. So Emmanuel, thank you so very kindly for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us. Smith, as they say in the Caribbean, my brother from another mother, it was a pleasure to have him here and to share the Haitian perspective. And really, it gives us that sense of understanding that not everything you see in the mainstream media about any particular country is what you should just accept and swallow. There's so much that is taking place in the country, notwithstanding the other challenges that make it into the media, and the fact that civil society organizations continue to do this work uninterrupted, persistent and caring and compassionate. I think it's a wonderful lesson for each of us in the Caribbean as to what resilience looks like. And of course, Marta, our wonderful senior program manager for research, who definitely is an honorary Caribbean person, having visited Antigua and Barbuda earlier this year and doing such great work for us in terms of research. Thank you for pulling that together in terms of the overview of what the Caribbean looks like in terms of the different ages for legal work, and of course, what is happening for children to be able to read it for themselves. I love the fact that we are not just talking about things that involve children, but we're involving youth, Emmanuel and Richard, and we're producing outputs which can be read by youth in simple enough language that they can understand and they can act upon by having a number that they can call, someone to whom they can reach out if they or someone they know are in a situation of exploitation. So kudos to all of you, and wonderful thanks to Carla for providing beautiful interpretation and helping us understand Richard's contribution, Emmanuel's contribution to the discussion, and keeping him informed throughout as to what's taking place. And Brian Lippincott, who is our all in all, in terms of communications here at Free the Slaves and keeping things flowing behind the scenes. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what your contributions are. But before you do that, I just want to honor Diane for stepping into these shoes as moderator for this panel. And really, I know she is super busy. She wears multiple hats that we didn't really get into in her bio per se, but thank you so much, Diane, the work that you do as an individual and the work that you do in Jamaica and the role that you carry at a global level in protecting children. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And because you are not schizophrenic, you omitted to thank yourself. So I'm going to do that. Thank you, Adrian, for really being the glue and being a very critical part of the inception, the organization, and the execution of this event. It would not have been as seamless without your contribution, not only for this, but for everything you do as the anchor in the Caribbean. So thank you so much, Adrian. All right, panelists, are you ready with your one short nugget that you want the audience to leave here with this afternoon? Marta?
Yes, thank you. I would say that for me it would be wonderful, and I would consider it a success for this webinar if the audience could leave this room reflecting on the importance of engaging children in the conversations that we have on child labor. Too often these spaces are dominated by adult voices, while it is critical that we have people such as Emmanuel today or Richard that can truly bring the children's perspective to the fore. And along the same lines, the importance of producing research, resources, materials that are child-friendly, that children can read, engage with independently, and that can truly use to take actions, become agents of their own lives, and protect better themselves and other people that are part of their lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. Neil?
In my case, I think I'll leave with decent work. I think because it's really the end point, and we could plug it all in. Whether we speak of the issue of child labor, child abuse, education systems, pay, support to the parent, all the pieces that lead to this really focuses on decent work as a resolution to that. I think once the legislation and all the systems are there, I think once we start following that process, we should see success.
Thank you so very much, Neil. Smith?
Yes, thank you, Diane. Before answering your question, let me make a public demand to Adrian and Marta. Don't forget the fact sheet for the Haitian. We have 12 million people speaking Haitian Creole. Don't forget in the Caribbean. If you can put this in the language of for Haitian, that would be fantastic contribution for the movement in Haiti. For me, I want to echo what Richard said and build strong family. I think this is key to prevent child labor. But I want to add to that to say we need to build a network of care around the survivors and for their reintegration. This is key. The prevention, but also the reintegration. That's the you know, part I would say, don't go with this and then build this in the communities.
Thank you so much, Smith. Is Emmanuel going to give us a takeaway? One thing he would like stakeholders, Caribbean people to be very mindful of? I'm not sure if we still have our interpreters, so I'm not sure if he's going to be able.
Oui.
Yes.
Allez, on va mettre back.
Momenty.
Ok. Sam ta remen ou bien ta toujou souhaité ki fet,
What I would like and wish would happen
se ke ta remen kom si même travail sa kap fet lan,
that
pour
even the
tout
same
fait.
work that's being done,
Et puis, nap toujou goumen ke même sa mwen te endure an,
so that we'll continue to fight that what I endured.
donc, nta remen ke nou bataille plus pour l'autre ti génération ou bien l'autre ti moun pa subi même ak sa.
So what I endured and what I suffered, that the next generation does not have to endure it.
Ok.
Mhm.
Merci.
Merci. Thank you.
Thank you. And Richard.
So, can you all hear me clearly?
Enough. Not as you were, but you can.
Okay. Let me say that in Suriname and the broader Caribbean, we don't lack laws. We only lack the enforcement of these laws. So I would like to say to all listening in this webinar that let us enforce our laws and let's fully fund our social safety network and work together across our beautiful region. And to the youth listening, I've learned a quote and I've made it my own, that there's nothing wrong with the Caribbean that cannot be fixed by what is right with the Caribbean. And what is right with the Caribbean is its youth. So be the change, enforce everything that you've learned here and make it known in the broader Caribbean. I end by saying, let's wish it, let's dream it, and let's do it. I thank you.
Excellent note of positivity for us to close on. And audience, as you go into tomorrow, which is the day, I encourage you to reflect on the 5 takeaways. Engage children in the conversation. Decent work is non-negotiable. Strong families are critical to the prevention of child labor, but equally to the protection and reintegration of survivors. Listen to the lived experience of the voice that has been there. His sole wish is for the work to continue so that what he endured and suffered will not be the plight of the next generation. And we need to enforce the legal frameworks that we have created. Let's enforce our laws and fully fund our social safety networks. And I'm going to bastardize Richard's quote just a little bit, that there's nothing right, all cannot collect. And so with I thank all for attending, and I thank you all for the continued work that you will do in your various organizations and communities, and hope that you found this as much of a learning experience as we all did, and you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed participating. Thank you so much.
Diane, if I could just inform persons if they missed the links to the child labor fact sheet and the child-friendly version, they are in the chat, and they can also access the information from the Caribbean landing page on the Free the Slaves website. That is freetheslaves.net/Caribbean. Again, freetheslaves.net/Caribbean. You'll also be able to see upcoming webinars that we'll be having in the near future from that page. And you would have heard of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. If that is unfamiliar to you, then you can also visit their website at ccatip.org. That's ccatip.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you.